Member for Foothills.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I appreciate the opportunity to speak today on Bill C-26. And I think what we're hearing today is, a frightening trend from the Liberal government where we're going to impose some punitive taxes without consultation, with very little feedback from stakeholders. We're going to, and really very little knowledge on the economic impact that these decisions and these policies are going to have on Canadian families and Canadian small businesses specifically. First we started with the carbon tax, which is going to make, increase the cost of pretty much everything. Then we changed the mortgage rules, which is making it that much more difficult for young Canadians to buy their first homes. And now we're talking about a hike to the CPP, which is going to really hamper growth in our small business sector. These are all decisions and policy that have been imposed by this Liberal government with absolutely no consultation and no study in the ramifications that this is going to have on Canadian families, small businesses, and the provinces. I'm the Vice Chair of the Standing Committee on Natural Resources. We've been hearing from stakeholders over the last couple of weeks since the carbon tax was announced, and all of them are saying no one spoke to us about this. This is going to make the difference between us putting a shovel in the ground in some projects or walking away entirely. So what is going to be the ramifications and the implications to our energy industry, which is already struggling, when you impose a punitive carbon tax without any data to back it up on the economic impact of that decision? So yesterday in our Natural Resources Committee, we put forward a motion asking for the committee to do an emergency study on the economic impact of the carbon tax on the natural resources sector. If they are that confident in their policies, the carbon tax, the CPP tax hike, if they're that confident these are going to have beneficial and positive ramifications to Canadians across the country, then in my estimation that they would have agreed to go ahead with that study. But they didn't. They unanimously voted it down because they don't know the ramifications that policies like this are going to have on hardworking Canadian families. They are just plowing ahead with these kinds of decisions because they think it makes great politics for their very vocal minority, union bosses, big companies. Those are the ones that are driving these decisions. They are not talking to lower middle class Canadians, the ones that these decisions are going to impact in their pocketbook. That's what makes these types of decisions so frustrating. A couple of weeks ago, I had the opportunity to speak at a summit in Calgary, which was unfortunately titled "The Jobs Crisis for Energy Professionals in Alberta." There's more than 200 professionals at that meeting. These were not rig workers. These were not welders. These are not the people that we typically associate with feeling the impact of the downturn in the energy sector. These were petroleum engineers, geophysicists, geologists. Many of them have not had a job in more than 2 years. And I asked them afterwards, I said, well, were you consulted, were your associations consulted about the imposing of a carbon tax? Were you consulted about having a tax increase on the Canadian pension plan? Did the Liberal government come and talk to your associations, which would include thousands of Canadian professionals across the country? Did they talk to you about this? Every single one of them said no. This was a complete shock to us to see these things come forward.
Shameful.
And I asked them, well, we've had these ups and downs, booms and busts in the energy sector for decades. And they agreed, absolutely, we've gone through these many, many times. But this is the worst they have ever seen. And we heard it in question period today. We've heard it many times over the last week, that Alberta has been hit hard by the downturn because of low oil prices. A barrel of oil is now more than $50. It is not low oil prices are the only reason that Alberta is struggling right now. It is bad policy. It is inaction. It is tax increases on businesses and employers. They said they do not see a light at the end of this tunnel because of the policies being forward. A carbon tax, which is increasing indecision in this industry. It is driving away investment, and their jobs are going with them. We are going to lose that intellectual capital because of these decisions. We are uncompetitive globally in energy, manufacturing, agriculture, thanks to the decisions of this government to put forward a carbon tax and now a CPP tax hike and not to mention the changes to the mortgage rules, which is making it more difficult for young families to buy their first home. And my colleague across the floor from Winnipeg North was saying when he was door knocking in his communities, he was overwhelmed by Canadians asking for these changes. I had zero. Not once did I go to a door and somebody said, boy, I am really looking forward to a carbon tax. I am really looking forward to a hike in my CPP taxes. And you know what? I really hope that you make it more difficult for me to buy my first home. I don't know, maybe residents of Southern Alberta are much more savvy. I'm not sure, but these issues were never raised in that campaign. So for them to say that they've had this incredible mandate because of what happened a year ago, I think is disingenuous. I think they are putting through decisions that they feel will appeal to a very vocal minority of Canadians that is not in the best interests of hardworking Canadian families. Now, I'd just like to talk about some of the things that have been said so far today about how this is going to help the Canadians in their retirement. Having an increase in the CPP is great if I had a job. But now there's more than 200,000 Canadians who don't have jobs. And I haven't heard any decisions or any policies brought forward by this government that's going to help change that. And we had vehicles in place that will help Canadians save. And what I think is most important with those things, including the tax-free savings account, which this government decided to claw back. And again, in contrast to what my honourable colleagues have been saying, that is something I definitely heard at doors, is they liked the opportunity to save on their own terms. It is absolutely their money, and they want to make the decisions of what they do and how they save with their own money. I think it is definitely steps backwards when we look at government as being the answer to everything. You don't know how to save, government will take care of that for you. Canadians are much more savvy than this, unfortunately, this Liberal government is giving them credit for. Now, we also heard when the decision to claw back the tax-free savings account, we heard, well, this was just a vehicle for the wealthy. Only wealthy Canadians had the opportunity to invest in a tax-free savings account.
Absolutely not.
60% of those Canadians who had maxed out their tax-free savings account were making $60,000 or less. Those are not wealthy Canadians. Those are hardworking Canadian families who are making very tough choices for their future. They were putting money aside to buy that first home, which now unfortunately is even more difficult to buy. And I would ask where the government got the information that this was a good decision, maybe for Vancouver, maybe for Toronto, but certainly not for Calgary and rural Alberta. I certainly have not had anybody come to me and say this is a good decision, and I've had the exact opposite. Realtors, mortgages, credit unions, young families come to me and say, this is devastating. Now it's going to take me another decade to save up for that first home, which we know is one of their largest investments that they will have in their lifetime. But when I was going to doors last October, I had so many Canadians and so many residents in my riding of Foothills talk to me about the importance of the tax-free savings account and how welcoming they were that they would have an opportunity to invest further in a tax-free savings account. And like I said, these are Canadians who are making very difficult choices for their families, whether it was a first home, their child's education, saving for their own retirement. But the key to that is Canadians had the opportunity to make their own decisions on what they felt was best for them and best for their family and their children's future. This is a decision, once again, where government is imposing its will on Canadians. And Canadians have not said in any way, shape, or form that this is what they want. Whether it's a carbon tax, mortgage rule changes, tax-free savings account, electoral reform. I don't understand why this government feels that it should be governing with an iron fist, a sledgehammer, and imposing its will on the provinces and Canadians. This is certainly not what I heard from hardworking Canadian families or certainly folks in my riding throughout the election campaign and even before that. But I think what's really been overlooked here is the impact that this is going to have on small businesses. You know, it's ironic that we're having this discussion during Small Business Week here in Canada. I am hearing daily from small business owners in my riding in Southern Alberta, but across the province, that they are struggling. And I don't think that's any mystery, despite the fact that our government and our Liberal government will not do anything about it, except say, you know, we have compassion and sympathy for what's going on in Alberta. We'll do something about it. Give us a hand. Imposing a carbon tax and now a CPP hike on small business owners is certainly not the way to do it. We have a very fragile economy right now in Alberta. And to impose these types of decisions when we are struggling does not make any sense. Alberta was the economic engine of this country for decades. And unfortunately, that engine is stalled. But rather than give us a lifeline, you're throwing us an anchor. And this is going to push those small business owners off the edge. Right now in Calgary, the unemployment rate is now in double digits. The vacancy rate in Calgary is at 30%, downtown Calgary. It's unbelievable for me now, in a province that I've raised my family and I've worked in, that I can go to downtown Calgary and see 8th Avenue deserted, to see entire floors of business buildings and office towers deserted. Nothing but empty desks, empty offices, and yet our top priority is to impose a Canada Pension Plan tax hike, which is going to cost business owners more than $1,000 a year per employee. And Dan Kelly, the President and CEO of the Canadian the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and I would just like to read his quote. 2/3 of small firms say they will have to freeze or cut salaries, and over 1/3 say they will have to reduce hours or jobs in their business in response to the CPP hike. So when we are already struggling with an unemployment rate close to double digits, in some communities well over double digits in Alberta, 200,000 energy jobs, direct and indirect jobs, have been lost. We're going to be further making employment numbers stressed. It's going to be more difficult for a small business owner to hire because of these increased costs through the CPP tax hike that I don't think anyone was really asking for. And here's another quote I wanted to bring up from Hendrik Brackel, a senior director at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. He said, "We are worried a big tax increase is headed to the middle class like an elbow to the chest. This comes at the worst possible time. An economy reeling from weak commodity prices and slower consumer spending will be lucky to eke out growth of 1.5% next year. It's difficult to stimulate the economy while pulling money out of the pockets of Canadians." Now, those are a couple, the Chamber of Commerce, which represents business across the country. The Canadian Federation of Independent Business, again, represents businesses across the country. These people are raising the alarm that what the impact this CPP tax hike will have on small businesses at the worst possible time. And I know we talk a lot about Alberta, but the energy downturn has impacted Canadians across the country. I was in Nova Scotia a couple of weeks ago, and it was amazing how many people I had come to me and say, you know what, I was working in Alberta, I was working the oil sands, but I had to come home, obviously, because there's no jobs. But there's no jobs for me here either. We need Energy East. We need policies in place that will kickstart our energy industry. But instead, when it's down, we kick it with a carbon tax and now a CPP tax hike. Where does this make sense? And Madam Speaker, I'm going to conclude with this. This is my question all along, is if they are so confident that these types of policies are going to bring this great positive change to our economy, is going to bring all these great jobs to Canadians, prove it. Show me the data. Show me that you did an economic impact study before you announced the carbon tax, before you announced the CPP tax hike. I haven't seen it. If you're so confident this is the best thing for Canadians, show it to me.